This is what a lot of newbies aren't getting. It is what everything is about.
I almost want you to say that again because people need to hear that that's the whole kit and caboodle. I do want to talk about the flaw.
Oh, I love talking about the flaw.
All right. Well, I got plenty of myself. Can you talk
Me
about the
too.
flaw?
Flaws everything. The flaw is the story.
Yeah.
It's the DNA out of the whole thing. This is
Preach.
what this is why we're putting them on this journey.
That's
They're
right.
having to this is why they're not a victim also because they even if there terrible things are happening to them and and I'm and just a side note, of course I'm not saying they deserve someone deserves those terrible things most of the time. But the thing that makes them a protagonist is that despite the bad things happening to them, there's something in them that is making things worse for themselves. And this awful thing happening to them is getting them to face something they never were going to face. They were going to keep on their whole life never having faced whatever this flaw was. And so I love talking about the flaw, and it's something we talk about a lot in my class. And by the way, I should say with all my clients as well. And I always tell people to dig deeper, right? So the flaw. Let me just be clear about how I define it. The flaw means something internal that we can judge them for, that they have control over. So it is, and I would even say something like alcoholism, I wouldn't call a flaw for our purposes. I would call that's really behavior that we would ask, well, what is the flaw that creates the alcoholic? Because there are different types, right? Somebody could be an alcoholic because they're selfish. Another person could be, alcoholic because they've just lost all faith in themselves. They're different things. So let's dig deeper. What is the thing underneath it that they have that this thing they've been doing that they think serves them that is not serving? And with a story, the idea is that all of a sudden, boom, something happens to them that they don't even realize that it's getting them to face something in themselves they never were going to face. So that's why it is the story. This is what a lot of newbies aren't getting. It is what everything is about.
My God. I almost want you to say that again because people need to hear that that's the whole kit and caboodle. There's these two things that you use throughout your book that are fantastic. One is talking about the flaw, which I call the emotional wound in mine, but same difference. And then opposites. You have opposites throughout your structure, and you talk about it in a number of different ways. Can you talk about the power of opposites in terms of storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, two very distinct ways that they appear in the nutshell would be the flaw strength and then also the want and the crisis. And so the flaw, the strength is, we talked about how the flaw is essential. It is the story. And so if a story is, and I should clarify, I break stories into Aristotelian comedies and tragedies, right? And so these things are going to be different. And most stories are Aristotelian comedies, which means simply the protagonist has a happy ending and they learn something, right? I'm oversimplifying it a bit, but that's generally what we mean. It does not mean ha ha comedy. These, as the name would suggest, come from Aristotle. And as I tell my students, if you don't like the definitions, you can blame him. But that is how he defined a comedy. It's where the hero overcomes the flaw, and as a result, they get a happy ending. And so, and tragedy though is an opposite, is where the hero fails to overcome the flaw and they fail to have a happy ending. And so, in a comedy, we're going to see the protagonist go from a flaw to its opposite, which I call a strength. And so they're going to be continue their flawed way throughout Act One, throughout Act Two, and it's not until they hit the rock bottom of the crisis that they finally start to change and finally reach the polar opposite of the flaw that they had in the beginning. So, to use one of my examples, I've used Tootsie, right? Is his flaws, he doesn't respect women. By the end, having gone through this journey, literally walking in women's shoes, he has learned respect for women, right? A tragedy, the protagonist is not going to move away from the flaw. I still tell people on my tragedy form to I think it's important to identify what the strength would have been, so that we can, so that you understand again that your character's not a victim, that had he or she made a positive choice in the climax towards the strength, they could have had a happy ending. But we see, and we want this feeling of like, why did you make that choice? That's the choice. They make that flawed choice instead, and that gives them their sad ending. And then the other big opposites are the what happens with the setup want, and then in a comedy at the crisis, which is what I call what happens at 75%. And this is something I think different, somewhat different than I think most people, where the crisis is not just the dark night of the soul, right? It's not just their lowest moment, although it should have also, that's also an important criteria. It
Mhm.
should be their lowest moment. And this is something where people, I see writers very often not coming nearly low enough.
Mhm.
And you'll see on my checklist, I say, is that really the lowest you could take the character? Like, what if everything you said, plus they were in jail, plus they were suicidal?
Mhm.
Because that's the lowest we can go. We're suicidal, right? You see that in every single Frank Capra movie. The It's a Wonderful Life. Uh, Meet Joe Black, I think is the name of it. And Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And all three of those movies, the protagonist is suicidal at the crisis.
Hmm.
Just that's just a benchmark to keep in mind. Are you truly taking your character the lowest? So it's the lowest, but it's also, this is the tricky part, and this is why the want is tricky, is because it's the lowest and it's the opposite of what they want.
Mm.
So again, we're doing a little bit more of that irony icing. The thing that you thought you wanted, you now, it's not that you didn't get the want, it's now that you hate the thing you want. You've gone a full 180 on that. You thought you wanted an acting job more than anything. At 75%, you want out of this acting job more than anything. In Groundhog Day, he wants to only spend 24 hours in Puxatani. At 75%, he's finally had this amazing day with the Rita character and told her the truth about what's happening. And as she's falling asleep, he says, and you know what the worst part is? Tomorrow, you're going to think I'm a jerk again. He wants the day to last forever.
Mhm.
What great irony is that,
Yeah,
right? The whole movie's been trapped trying to get out of this, and he just wishes this day could last forever.
it gets me emotional just thinking about it.
Good, should, right? And we kind of, to get emotional, you really have to take your character as low as you can go, and also show they've completely changed. They've completely changed they haven't completely changed personality, right? They still need the third act to finally gain the strength. But they finally have realized that thing I coveted so much has brought me nothing but misery.
Yeah.
And I need to rethink. And I have a crisis of faith now, right? And I might be suicidal because everything I thought I knew, I now disagree with.